carbon that's from the atmosphere is stored in the plant body through the process called the carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide, then when the plant dries, the crop residue goes back into the soil and it forms an organic matter. And that organic matter, then it can also be decomposed by microbial organisms. So what happens is that you have this carbon coming out up from the atmosphere, is being sequestered fixed in the plants, and then you have got deposited in the soil as an organic matter. But this organic matter can also be decomposed, and it can release your CO2, carbon dioxide. And then there are other carbon cycles over here. Besides, you have got the one on the right. If you see all kinds of processes going on, carbon is coming out from the factory emissions. Carbon is added from the manures and compost, or those dead organic and waste products. And then we have those carbons in the fossil fuels and also in the ocean's water. Well, we are not interested about all those right-hand side, but we are interested in the left-hand side. This left-hand side is the one when we have carbon output versus carbon input. So the carbon sequestration occurs when we have got the carbon inputs from crop residue and organic amendments. Organic amendments means compost and manure, minus carbon output. Carbon output means carbon lost in the atmosphere through microbial respiration and organic matter decomposition. The carbon sequestration occurs when carbon input is greater than carbon output. Okay? So this is what we are interested in. If we can improve the amount of carbon input, then we can sequester carbon in the soil. There is a picture of a soil profile on the right side. As we see over there on the top, the soils are usually dark layers on the top soils, and as you go down, then the colors becomes white. The dark color is because of the deposition of organic matter or the organic carbon. So as the organic carbon is increased, you will see more carbon sequestered in the soil surface layer. But as you go down, the concentration of organic carbon decreases. But in the same time, we do have inorganic carbon too, especially in the dryland cropping systems. Those inorganic carbon is usually low in the surface soil, but as it goes down in the soils, the inorganic carbon level increases. And this inorganic carbon is usually formed from the parent materials, and they are such as calcite and dolomite. Those parent materials, when they break down, they weather out, you can see lots of inorganic carbon deposited on the deep surface layers. So the process is reversed. Organic carbon is higher in the top, but it goes down with the depth. On the other hand, inorganic carbon is low in the upper layers, and then it increases with depth. So then we have got two kinds of carbon, organic and inorganic carbon, and I will be also talking about total carbon. Total carbon is the sum of organic carbon and inorganic carbon. So some of the things also that the benefit of having increasing carbon storage is that if you increase the carbon level, it can also improve your soil health and crop production. And the last thing is that if you increase your soil carbon storage, it can also become an additional income source from the carbon credit markets. Okay? So let's talk about something about the various management practices that we are doing. We have been working on different kinds of management practices, and we want to talk about how these management practices can affect soil carbon and how can carbon storage be improved using improved management techniques. So this is a study that I have done. It's a long-term study in Pride, Montana. You'll see This is a 36-year story, and it sees, you see those carbon label from the top. From the top, so you have got 4 types of cropping sequences, tillage and cropping sequences. The NTCW at the top is a no-till continuous spring wheat. FSTCW is a fall and spring till continuous wheat. And then NTWP is a no-till wheat barley in the 1984 to 1996. That was replaced by no-till spring wheat pea from 1997 to 2009. And then the STWF is a spring till wheat fallow system. That's our conventional system. So spring till wheat fallow is a 2-year rotation of 1 year in a spring wheat, 1 year in a fallow, and then no-till wheat pea is also a 2-year rotation, wheat or barley, then pea is the second road. Then the NTCW and FSTCW is just the 1-year rotation. And you can see those carbon label. We took the soil sample in the soil profile from 5 depth. You see 0 to 6 inch, 6 to 12 inch, 12 to 24 inch, 24 to 36, and 36 to 48 inch, okay? So you see those values in the soil carbon storage. You see those actual negative, these are not the actual number, but we are looking from top to down in the soil profile. That's how much the carbon storage is in there. And if you look, if you see those, the black colors on the top up in here, you see those, that black color left by a letter, joined by a letter. That means the same letter has no difference. But if you have different letters, they are different, significantly different. And you can see that the NTCW and FSTCW has a higher carbon compared with the STWF. See that the STW have a B letter, but NTCW and FSTCW has a A letter. That means if you use the STWF, that's the wheat fallow system, we lost about 35 to 40% of carbon after 36 years. That's what he's talking about. So we lost, you see, if you see that, the conventional system of using wheat fallow can lose carbon by 30 to 40% after 36 years, and they occurs mostly in the surface layer, mostly in the 0 to 6 inch layer. If you go down to the other depth layer, like 6 to 12, 12 to 24, 24 to 36, and 36 to 48 inch layers, those carbon levels are not so much different. But if you look at the total profile carbon for the whole depth, from 0 to 48 inch depth, those STWF again have a lower carbon level. If you see that those big letters at the A, B, and big, large letters, capital letters, on the bottom of those profile, that means also the significantly different. So just by using your fallow system, wheat fallow system, you can lose your carbon by almost 30 to 40% after 36 years. That's because during the fallow period, there is no crop. There is no crop residue. Because of the absence of crop residue, during those fallow periods, you will lose your carbon levels after 36 years. Now, why we want to look at how much carbon input crop residue is going back. Why is this fallow period has so much low carbon? It's because of look at this mean crop residue. That's a 36-year average of the crop residue input going out into the soil. You can see that the STWF again has about 40 to 45% of less crop residue going into the soil compared to the other treatments, NTCW, FSTCW, and NTWF. So because you have less amount of crop residue, that annualized crop residue means the residue of the two-year rotations. Crop residue during the fallow is 0. So the 2-year rotation in the 0 times, when you average it out, that will becomes a rotation system for a 2 years in the system. When you take the average out, that will becomes the annualized crop residue. And then annualized crop residue is about 40% lower in the STWF than in other cropping systems, and that's that helps in reducing our carbon storage. We also look at the inorganic carbon storage after 36 years on the same treatments, and you can see those inorganic carbons are very low on the surface soils. You can see hardly those black colors up in the air. They are very low, but as you go down the depth, you see the inorganic carbon increases with the depth. And there are some variation among the treatments in the different layers, different depth layers. And so you can see some treatment differences with the NTWP being slightly lower in the total inorganic carbon compared with the other treatments. Now, we did another study. It's about the effect of the tillage in Sydney. After 8 years of study, we look at the effect of tillage, conventional tillage and no tillage. Again, we took our soil sample to 6 different depths, and you can see there is no difference of the tillage. Tillage doesn't have any difference, and the soil carbon stays. The same amount of carbon is there between no tillage and conventional tillage. When you look at crop rotation, we did a crop rotation study. We have a 4 crop rotation, 1 year rotation, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 year rotation. 1 year rotation is a continuous CW, is a 1 year rotation, continuous spring wheat. WP is a spring wheat P rotation. WBP is a 3 year rotation of spring wheat, barley, forage barley, and pea. And the 4 year rotation is a spring wheat, forage barley, corn, and pea. When you look at the effect of crop rotation on this soil carbon storage, there are a little bit difference on the top layers, especially in the 0 to 4 inch layers and 4 to 8 inch layers. Those 2 layers usually have a higher carbon levels in CW, continuous spring wheat, compared with the other rotation system. So if you do the continuous wheat, you do see a little bit of carbon level higher in the surface layer. But the whole profile, when you look at the whole profile, carbon level to a depth of 48 inch, there are no difference again in the carbon storage. But if you use the grasses, we try to study the grasses, the carbon level in the grasses versus the crops. So what we did here, after a 4 year study in the fried Montana, we used 3 different grasses versus spring wheat. IW is an intermediate wheat grass. SB is a smooth brome grass. SG is a switch grass. And SW is the spring wheat. And you can see that the carbon level in the grasses, yes, IW, SB, and SG is about 15% greater than spring wheat after 4 years, 3 to 4 years. Spring wheat is low carbon, but the grasses all the way to the depth of, even to a depth of 24 inches. You see this 0 to 6 inch, the black color, the red color is a 6 to 12, and the yellow color is a 12 to 24 inches depth. So all the way down to a depth of 24 inches, you see those grasses usually have a higher carbon level compared with the spring wheat level. The reason why we have so much higher carbon level under the grasses is because of the root biomass. This is a amount of root biomass that are going out with the grasses versus the crop. You see that the root biomass, we took all the way down to the 48 inch. The intermediate with the black colors are all the root biomass and the grasses. If you look at the spring wheat and all the way to the far right, the surface layer, there is a very little root biomass. So when you look at the root biomass, root biomass is the input of carbon to the soil. So when you look at the root biomass over there, intermediate wheatgrass has the highest root biomass to a depth of 48 inches or 4 feet, followed by the smooth barley and switchgrass has almost the second highest, but the spring wheat, look at the spring wheat. Spring wheat has a very low root biomass. And if you look at the root shoot ratio, we have a root shoot ratio to a depth of 0 to 4 inches. If you look at the IW, that's intermediate wheatgrass, has a root shoot ratio of 2.55. That means the root biomass of intermediate wheatgrass is 2.55 times higher than the shoot biomass. The smooth brome grass is about 2.65. The switchgrass root shoot ratio is 2.43. The spring wheat is only 0.33. So in the spring wheat, the root biomass is about only 1/3 of the shoot biomass. But the grasses has the root biomass, which is almost 2.35 to 2.55 greater, 2.65 greater. So much root biomass is going on from the grasses, and that's why it's making a lot of difference in the organic carbon. And you can see organic carbon even after 4 years with the grasses compared with the crops. But if you use the other management practices, you don't see, it takes a long time to see those carbon levels. If you look at the carbon levels again, we also use one of the CRP program to compare with the cropping system. This is in Nation Valley, North Dakota. We have a CRP program versus 3 kinds of cropping system to compare the total carbon. You see the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, then CTB is a continuous tillage barley, conventional tillage barley, NTB is a no-till barley, and NTBP is a no-till barley pea rotation. And you can see the carbon level in the CRP system after 6 years is about 15% higher compared to the other cropping system. You see those letters up in there. CRP, if you don't do anything and let the grass grow, those grasses can help in increasing the carbon level, especially in the surface layer. And if you look at the total profile depth to a depth of 48 inches, 34 inches depth, and you can see again, the whole carbon profile is again greater in the CRP system compared with the other cropping system. We also look at the effect of nitrogen fertilization, how the nitrogen fertilization affect our cropping system. This nitrogen fertilizer applied to spring wheat for 6 years. We see that there are 4 rates of nitrogen, 0, 36, 72, and 108 pound of nitrogen per hectare. Again, we see there are some difference in the subsoil layers, but the overall depth of the carbon storage is not affected by nitrogen fertilization. Even after 6 years, nitrogen fertilization did not affect soil carbon storage. Then we did some study about the effect of animal grazing, sheep grazing. In the Bozeman, Montana, this is a 7-year study, and we tried to compare GO is a sheep grazing in the organic cropping system. Sheep grazing is used to control the weeds in the organic cropping system. MT is a organic cropping system. There is no chemical inputs. MT is a minimum tillage system with chemical inputs, and the TO is a tillage system to control weed in the organic cropping system, but no chemical inputs. And we try to find out how much carbon level out there after 7 years of management, and you can see there are some increased carbon levels, especially in the lower profiles. They have 24 to 36 and 36 to 48 inches left. The grazing with the organic system usually increase the carbon storage levels. And you can see the total profile. When you look at the total profile at the bottom, the GO increases soil organic carbon level compared to the TO. So animal grazing has an advantage of increasing the carbon storage compared to the tillage practices. And we also look at the effect of irrigation. What would the irrigation would do? Irrigated versus non-irrigation on soil carbon storage. This is done in Nason Valley, North Dakota, after 6 years of irrigation. And although there are some effects on the subsurface layer, the overall effect to a depth of 34 inches depth, the irrigation usually also don't have any effect on the soil carbon level. Now we try to determine what would be the effect of carbon level on soil health. So what we did was we do a regression analysis. We found out the relationship between soil carbon at 0 to 6 inches depth versus different soil properties. So in these soil properties, we have this soil physical properties. And the physical properties, we have got the aggregate stability, water holding capacity, and bog density. What does that mean? Aggregate stability is the soil aggregation, which is good for erodibility and root depth, soil aggregation. And then water holding capacity is how much water the soil can hold. Then the bog density shows soil compaction. And we see that, if you increase your carbon level in the soil, it will increase your aggregate stability and water holding capacity, but it will decrease your bog density. That means by increasing your soil carbon, you are going to improve your physical properties. You are increase your soil water content, water holding capacity, you are increase your soil aggregation, but is also going to reduce your soil compaction. And we also related with carbon level with chemical properties, such as the electrical conductivity, soil nitrogen and potassium concentration. We see that as you increase your soil carbon storage, you are going to increase electrical conductivity, nitrogen level, and potassium level. That means it can increase your nutrients level in the soil with the increasing carbon level. And we look at the biological properties. Biological properties, we have got the potential carbon mineralization. That shows the microbial activity. Then we have got the potential nitrogen mineralization. That's the nitrogen mineralization, how much nitrogen is available during a growing season from the soil. Then the beta glucosidase is an enzyme activity. And then the phospholipid, lipid derived fatty acid is a microbial abundance. So this is the biological properties about microbial abundance, microbial activity, enzyme activity, and the amount of nitrogen available during a growing season. All of these going to be increased as you increase your carbon level. So in other words, if you increase your carbon level in the soil, it can enhance your physical properties, chemical properties, and biological properties. Then we also look at how does the carbon level increase the yield, crop yield. So we'll try to look at the increased carbon level versus the crop yield, mean crop yield across years. The average yield of 14 to 36 years at the two sites, Pride and Sidney, Montana. And it shows that if you increase your carbon level, you can also increase the yield. The yield increases because you can increase nutrient level, soil properties, and all those biological properties you have got there, and it helps in increasing the yield. So in conclusions, what we have found is that simply by using the summer fallow, if you use the fallow over there, we are going to lose your carbon level. because of the lack of absence of crop during the fallow season, you are going to reduce the crop residue inputs, and you can reduce organic carbon in the soil. It usually takes more than 10 years to observe the effect of management practices to enhance the carbon level in the dryland system. So it's a carbon sequestration is a slow process, especially in the dryland system, because we don't have so much residue input going on in there. So it takes about more than 10 years. But if you plant your grasses, you can enhance your carbon storage even after 3 to 4 years. The grasses have higher roots. You can increase your carbon if you plant grasses with the crops. And then the final conclusion is that if you increase your carbon level, it can enhance your soil health and also your crop production. And that's the last of my presentation. I thank you very much. I'll be happy if you have any questions.
How do you calculate how much carbon is human caused compared to how much carbon comes from nature? How do you make that calculation?
From what?
How do you calculate the impact of carbon released into the atmosphere from human activity compared to carbon that's there just from natural?
Carbon comes from the organic matter decomposition from the soil. So we measure it using different chambers, static chambers, to put how much carbon is being coming out from the soil. But in order to put the carbon input, then you use the amount of how much input in there, how much crop residue you are going to put back. So from there, then we see how much carbon going in there, how much carbon out there. We just, if you apply manures and fertilizers and compost, you can calculate how much residue input you put in there, and that's how you measure the carbon in the soil.
Yeah, I understand that part of it, but I just was, what we're looking at here is storing carbon in the soil as a result of human-caused activity, and how that's going to benefit the planet. So how do you make that connection?
Well, human-caused activities comes from fossil fuels, right? All different kinds of factories, cars.
Yeah.
So those are, we are only talking about agricultural activities.
Yeah, so wouldn't it be beneficial to calculate,
the human activities is especially in the management practices. When you do more with tillage practices, you lose the carbon. When you use the continuous, you will grow more intensive cultivation, you will start to lose the carbon. But if you use no tillage practices, put grasses in there, reduce the fallow system, don't use the fallow, use a continuous cropping, then you can increase your carbon level. That's what the human activities, especially the agricultural activities caused by the human. So if you use improved management techniques, you don't use so much of the tillage or fallow, those kind of practices, and then reduce the nitrogen inputs for the greenhouse gases, then you can increase your carbon level.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah. We have done our experiment for the last 36 years. We still have not reached that equilibrium yet. It's still going on there. So especially in the dryland system, we are not seeing any much of the carbon input. We have a low crop yield compared to the irrigated system. So the residue input is not that much, and we still have not seen that equilibrium level yet. So it might take about, I don't know how many, maybe a couple of more years. We are still, because we are still seeing those differences in the carbon level, it may take more than 30, 40 years.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.